1994, Gloucester, England. The police arrive at a normal-looking house at 25 Cromwell Street with shovels and tools. They are looking for a missing girl who vanished years ago. But as they dig into the basement and under the floorboards, they find something that haunts the world to this day. It is not just one body. It is a graveyard hidden inside a family home. Fred and Rose West were a husband and wife who seemed ordinary to their neighbors. But behind their front door, they were running a factory of death. For decades, they hunted young women and even their own children. The truth about what happened in that house is a journey into pure darkness. Welcome to the Well of Monsters. To the people living in Gloucester, Fred and Rose West were just a strange couple living in a big, messy house. Fred was a builder and a handyman. He was often seen working on his home, mixing cement and fixing walls. Rose was a housewife who took care of their many children. They were loud and sometimes had arguments, but no one ever suspected they were monsters. People walked past their house every day on the way to work or school. They saw the lace curtains and the garden, never knowing that a few feet away, young women were fighting for their lives. Fred and Rose had a way of blending into the background of a busy city. Fred was known as a talkative man who loved to tell stories, though many of them were lies. Rose was younger than Fred and seemed like a typical mother, but she was just as dangerous as her husband. Together, they built a life based on control and violence. They were experts at spotting vulnerable people. They looked for young girls who had run away from home or had no one to look for them. In the eyes of Fred and Rose, these people were not humans, they were targets. The house at 25 Cromwell Street was not just a home, it was a trap designed to keep people in and keep the truth out. The ordinary life they showed the world was a shield for the horror they were building in the basement. The story of the West's crime starts long before the police found the bodies in 1994. In the 1970s and 80s, young women began to vanish in the Gloucester area. One of the first was a girl named Heather, who was the daughter of Fred and Rose. When people asked where she went, Fred and Rose simply said she had moved away to start a new life. They told the other children that she had run off with a boyfriend and didn't want to talk to them anymore. Because the Wests were a troubled family, the authorities did not look too deeply into the story. They believed the lie that Heather had just left. But Heather was not the only one. Other young women who were staying at the house as lodgers or who met Fred while he was out driving also disappeared. The pattern was always the same. They would be seen one day, and the next they were gone without a trace. Their families would wait for calls that never came. Fred and Rose were very good at explaining away these absences. They knew that in a world without modern technology and DNA testing, it was easy for someone to get lost. They relied on the fact that no one would think to look under their own home. In early 1994, the police finally got a warrant to search 25 Cromwell Street. They were investigating the disappearance of Heather West. They began by digging in the back garden. It didn't take long before they found the remains of a young woman. At first, they thought they had found Heather and that would be the end of it. But as the forensic teams moved into the house and began to rip up the floorboards in the basement, the scale of the horror became clear. They found more bones. Then more. The house was literally built on top of the dead. The basement was a place of nightmare. Fred had used his skills as a builder to hide the bodies deep under the concrete floors he had poured himself. Every time he added a new room or a new wall, he was often hiding another victim. The police had to work slowly, using small brushes and tools to avoid damaging the evidence. The air in the house was heavy and smelled of damp earth. The world watched on the news as more and more body bags were carried out of the house. The ordinary family home was revealed to be a house of horrors where the walls themselves held secrets that were decades old. One of the most shocking parts of this case was that it was a husband and wife working together. Usually, serial killers work alone, but Fred and Rose were a team. Fred was the hunter who often found the victims, but Rose was often the one who participated in the violence inside the house. She was not a victim of Fred, she was his partner. She used her position as a mother to make young girls feel safe before the trap was closed. They shared a dark bond that was based on the suffering of others. They even involved their own children in some of the abuse, creating a cycle of terror that lasted for years. Fred had a history of violence before he met Rose, but when they came together, their darkness grew. They encouraged each other's worst instincts. They had a set of rules for their house that kept their children silent and terrified. Rose was known to be even more cold-hearted than Fred in many ways. While Fred often confessed and told stories to the police, Rose remained silent and angry, refusing to admit she had done anything wrong. Their partnership was a machine of death that worked perfectly because they both wanted the same thing: power and control over those weaker than them. As the investigation continued, the police identified the women found in the house. Some were lodgers, some were girls who had just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and some were Fred's own family members from his past. Each name that came out was a tragedy. There was Charmaine, Fred's stepdaughter, and Shirley Hubbard, a young girl who was just trying to get home. The police realized that Fred and Rose had been killing since the late 1960s. They had victims in other locations too, including a field in the countryside where Fred used to work. These were women with dreams and families who loved them. They were not just numbers on a police report. The Wests took everything from them. The investigation showed that the Wests would keep their victims for days or even weeks before ending their lives. The level of cruelty was something that even seasoned police officers found hard to handle. By looking at the victims, we see the true cost of the West's crimes. They stole their futures and left their families in a lifetime of pain, wondering for decades where their loved ones had gone. When Fred West was arrested, he did something the police didn't expect. He started talking. He confessed to many of the murders, but he did it in a way that was confusing. He would tell the truth about one body and then lie about another. He seemed to enjoy the attention he was getting from the detectives. He acted like a friendly old man, talking about the murders as if he were talking about a building project. He tried to take all the blame on himself to protect Rose, but the evidence showed that Rose was right there with him. The police had to spend hundreds of hours listening to Fred's tapes. They had to separate his lies from the facts. He was a master of manipulation. He wanted to stay in control even while he was in a cell. He would lead the police to a location, watch them dig, and then laugh when they found nothing. He was playing with the memories of the dead. But as the physical evidence became stronger, Fred's games began to fail. The police found enough proof to show that he was a monster no matter how many stories he told. His talkative nature eventually provided the clues the police needed to link Rose to the crimes. While Fred was talking, Rose West was a stone. She denied everything. She claimed she was just a normal mother who knew nothing about the bodies under her floors. She tried to act like she was a victim of Fred's violence, but the survivors, their own children, told a different story. They told the police that Rose was often the leader of the abuse. She was a woman of high intelligence and even higher cruelty. She didn't have the talkative ego that Fred had, she had a cold, quiet anger that was much more frightening. The police faced a difficult task in proving Rose was guilty of murder. Since Fred was taking the blame, they had to find independent evidence that she participated. They interviewed survivors who had escaped the house years before. They looked at the forensic evidence that showed two people had to be involved in the crimes. Rose's wall of silence was her greatest weapon, but the voices of the victims began to break it down. Her own children stood up in court and told the world what kind of mother she really was. The mask of the ordinary housewife was finally ripped away, revealing the predator underneath. On New Year's Day in 1995, before his trial could begin, Fred West took his own life in his prison cell. He never had to stand before a judge or look at the families of his victims. His death was seen as a final act of cowardice. By dying, he thought he could take his secrets to the grave and protect Rose one last time. It left the public and the victims' families feeling cheated of justice. There were so many questions that only Fred could answer, and now he was gone. The police were worried that without Fred, the case against Rose might fall apart. They had to work even harder to ensure she didn't walk free. Fred's death also meant that the locations of other possible victims might never be found. He had hinted at more bodies in other parts of the country, but those secrets died with him. He was a man who chose the easy way out, leaving a trail of destruction behind him. Even in death, Fred West found a way to cause more pain to the people he had already hurt. The trial of Rose West was one of the biggest in British history. Because Fred was dead, Rose was the only one left to answer for the horrors of 25 Cromwell Street. The courtroom was filled with emotion as the details of the murders were read out. Witnesses described the house as a place of constant fear. The most powerful testimony came from the West children. They spoke about the years of torture and how their mother had ruled the house with an iron fist. They told the jury that it was impossible for Rose not to know about the bodies. Rose sat in the dock looking like an ordinary middle-aged woman in a cardigan. She still denied everything. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury heard how she had participated in the hunting and killing of the young women. Rose West was found guilty of 10 murders. She was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in prison. It was a moment of victory for the families, but it could not bring back the daughters they had lost. The trial proved that Rose was not a bystander, she was a primary architect of the House of Horrors. A few years after the trial, the house at 25 Cromwell Street was torn down. The city of Gloucester didn't want it to become a place for tourists or a reminder of the darkness. Today, there is just a simple path where the house once stood. But the memory of what Fred and Rose West did cannot be erased so easily. This case changed how the UK looks at missing persons and how the police investigate family violence. It remains a warning that evil can live right next door, hiding behind the most ordinary faces. It asks how they were able to get away with murder for so long. It looks at the failure of social services and the police to listen to the early warnings. We remember the victims, the young women who were looking for a better life but found a nightmare instead. Fred and Rose West are gone from the world, but their story stays with us as a reminder to always look closer and to never ignore the cries for help. The house is gone, but the lesson remains. Monsters do not always live in the woods, sometimes they live at number 25. Subscribe, ring the bell, and thanks for watching. Don't forget. I'll see you at the bottom of the well.